we play a game?
Why, yes, I believe we shall.
Oh, I got a live one here.
Getting geeky in Little Rock, it's Shane Plays Geek Talk, a journey into the things we love. I'm your host, Shane Staggs. Thanks so much for joining. Whether you're listening to the radio broadcast on Saturday, August 3rd at 1 p.m. Central on 101.1 FM The Answer, or online at 1011fmtheanswer.com, or if you're listening later by podcast or on Krypton Radio or on YouTube, no matter how you're listening, I'm just glad to have you. We've got a really cool show today. As a reminder, if people are just listening for the first time, this is Geek Talk Radio. So it's talk radio, just like political talk radio or, hey, sports talk radio or let's fix my car talk radio, but it's Geek Talk. So it's games, it's movies, comic books, RPGs, you name it. If it's geeky, it goes. Today is a really cool show. This is the continuing story of a game that I first played back in the 80s. That was when I first saw it, it was just the coolest board game I'd probably seen at that time. It's still a really cool board game. Board games have gotten more complex since then, but it's still cool on its own right. And now it has an online counterpart. So now I've had folks from Beamdog on before, but this show's a little bit different today because Beamdog usually specializes in RPGs, in computer RPGs, Baldur's Gate, that sort of thing, either doing enhanced edition of previous Baldur's Gate games, or in the case of Siege of Dragonspear, doing an interquel, which was a game in between Baldur's Gate, I think 1 and 2. But this is a little bit different. So there's two reasons why I wanted to do this show. One was I like what Beamdog does, and any chance I have to talk with Beamdog is exciting for me. But two, now they're putting out a game which is just went into early access as of July 31st on Steam, based on the classic and very popular Axis and Allies board game. Now, this particular flavor is Axis and Allies 1942 Online, and joining us to talk about it all the way from Canada is Cody Ouimet, who is the producer for Axis and Allies 1942 Online for Beamdog. So, Cody, welcome to Shane Plays.
Hey, thanks for having me.
Yeah, man, thanks for making the time. Very exciting stuff. When Beamdog first announced Axis and Allies Online, it's 1942 Online to be specific, I was like, wow, I was really excited because I love Axis and Allies. And the thing with Axis and Allies is, as it's one of those games as you get older and you have more responsibilities and whatnot, it's harder to just, hey, let's get a bunch of people together and play Axis and Allies.
No, for sure.
Yeah.
That was kind of like the driving force, I think, behind when we started making this game was we all loved it, but I mean, like between the hour and a half to set it up and, like getting 4 friends around to play the game and how long it takes to play the game. It's just, how can we make this a better experience?
Especially for the time it came out. It was a very advanced board game that allowed you to play out a portion of World War II. It had all kinds of cool pieces and, at a time when, for mainstream board games, Risk was about as advanced as it got. The Axis and Allies was like mind-blowing. But I want to back up a little bit and let's learn a little bit about Cody. When did you first get into video games? And what was that moment that hooked you that this has become your profession?
So I've been playing games for as long as I can remember. Like I remember having an NES back when I was 2 or 3. It's kind of one of the first memories I have playing. I think I was playing Duck Hunt, actually, and like with the Zapper and stuff like that. But I really didn't most of my memories kind of come from like the Sega Genesis, Super Nintendo era. That's kind of the prime time for me growing up. What really hooked me, though, actually, was I remember when my family got our kind of first like Windows 3.1 PC for Christmas one year. My dad loved video games as well too, and he subscribed to PC Gamer, and he brought home a magazine, and it had a shareware disc in it, And on that shareware disc was Warcraft 2. And I must have played that shareware demo disc for Warcraft 2 with its five levels, I think. I don't know, almost 1,000 times.
Right.
In my life for a really, really long time when I was younger. And kind of cemented the foundation of kind of what I wanted to do. And then through high school and stuff like that, I really got into film and graphic design. Went to school for graphic design, and then kind of midway through, I decided that I wanted to try my hand at games rather than taking a crack at the film industry. So I was in Vancouver at the time and did a game design course at Vancouver Film School. That was super interesting, a lot of hard work. Came out of that right at the start of the video game crash that happened back in 2008. So I think the day I graduated, 4 studios in Vancouver closed down. So,
oh, no.
Family was still out here in Edmonton, so I came back, and I got a job at BioWare pretty quickly after I came back as a quality assurance analyst on Dragon Age Origins. That continued into Dragon Age 2. I got to work a little bit on Mass Effect 2 and Mass Effect 3, just a touch, and a little bit of Star Wars as well, too. Worked there for a few years, and then went somewhere else in the city that specialized in kind of heavy equipment and e-learning training for heavy industry. And they got really big into virtual reality, so I spent a few years kind of taking a deep dive into VR as it was kind of coming into its own with the Oculus Rift and HTC Vive. Last year, I think almost a year to the day, I think a year and two or 3 weeks at this point, I got a job offer here at Beamdog to come on board as a producer. I remember when I first got hired, I knew I was expecting to kind of be put on the console titles, the Baldur's Gates, Neverwinter Nights, and Icewind Dale and Fantasy Torment ports. Ended up getting put and placed onto Axis and Allies, which was really, really cool. I remember doing the interview, I saw the stack of all the Axis and Allies board games we had in the corner there, and it kind of alluded to an online digital board game platform during the interview, and I remember he's like, "Is it Axis and Allies?" And our old studio director at the time was just like, "Yeah, you saw through our secret." So I've been on Axis and Allies for a little bit over a year now. And yeah, it has been a roller coaster of a ride, and to finally have the game come out yesterday into early access has been exhilarating. And like I said, yeah, a little bit of an emotional roller coaster, but we're really, really positive here. I think there's been a lot of positive feedback about the game right now. Obviously, there's some wrinkles, with the release of the game and in early access that we're working on, but I think we're all feeling super, super positive about the release, and we're looking forward to working with the community to make the game even better than it is now.
Excellent. So there was a lot in there that probably perked a lot of people's ears up. I would be doing a disservice to the listeners if I didn't clarify your role at BioWare. So you did a lot of QA on Dragon Age Origins, and then the next Dragon Age. You said a little bit of Mass Effect, and then also Knights of the Old Republic, Star Wars Knights of the Old Republic.
Yeah, the online one.
Okay, the Old Republic online. So, and your time there was always in QA.
Yeah, QA. I was a design QA analyst, so I spent a lot of time working with the writers, cinematics designers, level designers, and tech designers, kind of trying to make sure that the game was as fun to play as possible.
These major studios, they don't just throw a game out there full of bugs. Like, oh, we're going to make, because I think that's the conception for a lot of people. Like, oh, they just want our money. And I'm not going to say there's never a situation somewhere at some game studio where they're like, we said, we're going to ship it by this date. We got to ship it by this date. But for the most part, there is a tremendous effort put into getting rid of bugs before. So like, what does that burn you out after a little while? Were you like, I got to get out of bug hunting, or like?
Have you ever heard of Einstein's definition of insanity? Doing the same thing over and over and over again, expecting a different result every time. That kind of sums up quality assurance in a nutshell. You basically you're playing the same game over and over and over again, different ways, trying to break it in new and unique ways. So yeah, you get like a little bit of burnout. To be honest though, coming out of Dragon Age Origins and Dragon Age 2, I didn't really have much burnout. And I mean, we put in some long days for sure. All the stories of crunch around the video game industry. I won't sugarcoat it. There was definitely a lot of long days on both of those projects in the QA world, but I never felt ever particularly burned out doing QA personally.
What is your role as producer on Axis and Allies 1942 online at Beamdog?
So the way I like to look at it is facilitating the developers. So it's kind of figuring out what we need to do, when we need to do it, and kind of who's going to be working on things, and also kind of what's the most valuable or the highest priority things we need to work on. So when you're starting a project and all the way up to the end, there's kind of a scope for the project that's kind of predefined, and making sure that we stay within that scope, which ultimately is also the budget, and making sure that the vision is also maintained so that we don't take, weird left turns into something that's not Axis and Allies, for instance. So helping out with that process with Axis and Allies, I also took on like a little bit of like a product owner type role as well too. So a little bit more kind of owning the vision of the project than I would normally as a producer on some projects. But yeah, definitely as a producer, a lot of my time is spent facilitating and making sure that the developers have all of the tools and all of the resources that they need to make the best game they possibly can.
Would you say that as producer that you're kind of overseeing the entire project, or is there like a lead developer that you work in tandem with?
So on Axis and Allies, it was kind of like a 3-person show.
Okay.
As far as kind of that kind of core vision ownership. So there was myself as a producer. I have a lead developer, Theo Keeler, who kind of manages directly and kind of owns the development side of things. And then we worked a lot with our art director here in the studio, Mike Spalding, to really kind of define the visual vision of what Axis and Allies could look like. So the result that you're seeing with the early access release is definitely kind of the final result of the three of us kind of really working together and working with all of our developers and designers and QA analysts to make a really enjoyable game for early access.
As far as early access, what is the current state of early access, would you say, compared to what your target like this, what used to, if they would have said gone gold or whatever, where do you like, what can they expect in early access right now?
So in early access, the game is definitely in a playable state. One of the big things we really wanted to look at was we wanted to work with the community to better assess what we need to do to kind of get the game to that state. Like, we have a lot of ideas, we have a lot of things that we would like to do, but we definitely wanted to integrate the community early on in this process so that we were developing features and tweaking things that would have a really, really solid result or a really, really solid kind of output at the end. So a lot of the feedback that we've got in early access, some of it we had kind of already identified ourselves for things that we wanted to continue to work on and continue to tweak. But there's things that we're seeing suggested that weren't even on our radar. So that's a really positive sign. The community is really engaging with it, especially that kind of pre-established Axis and Allies player who still play it quite frequently. They have a lot of feedback for us about things that they would like to see in the game, or ways that we can look at improving things in their vision. So yeah, it's definitely a way for us to work with the community to really get the game to a point where it's not only a really solid gameplay experience for the experienced Axis and Allies player and a nostalgia player, but really for new players as well too. Board games are kind of going through like this renaissance period right now.
Definitely, yeah.
And Axis and Allies as a brand just released a new game last year with Axis and Allies and Zombies. So we wanted to find a way that while people are really finding new ways to enjoy board games, and board games are kind of back in the zeitgeist for a term to use, but capitalizing on that and working with that community to take what makes board games really, really fun and find a way to do that in a digital space that's a little bit more accommodating for players with different schedules and different locations, and different types of responsibilities as an adult or a teenager or a kid, and really finding a way to make this brand and this game work in that kind of space.
Board games are big again, and they are. Both tabletop games in general are on a huge upswing, huge resurgence. Tabletop role-playing games, board games. There are people that they'll share with me games that are playing that I would consider sort of European imports, and that surprises me. And then it just shows how widespread it's gone. In some ways, I joke around that Settlers of Catan is kind of like the new Monopoly. How did, or what was the impetus, or how did Beamdog, who's generally known for computer role-playing games, decide to jump into World War II, a World War II board game? So how did that happen?
So Trent Oster, our CEO, was down at a Wizards of the Coast licensing summit, I believe, back in 2016 or 2015. And he had heard someone there talking about Axis and Allies as a brand. I think they were just starting to kind of get the ball rolling on the Zombies version. And he had overheard these conversations, and he kind of peaked up at that because he's kind of like you. He played the board game back in the 80s. He loved it. He had kind of two passions in life growing up, and that was Dungeons and Dragons and Axis and Allies. So he kind of jumped at the opportunity to make a digital adaptation of it. So started working on the process to get the license and dot the I's and cross the T's and all that fun stuff. And then development on the game kind of picked up in 2017, mid to late 2017, and we've been working on it ever since.
So it wasn't a decision on Beamdog as a whole to say, hey, we're going to explore all this different kind of stuff. It was Trent Oster chasing a personal love of his. It's
very much like was kind of his pet project. It was his passion, much like D&D was. Obviously, he had a history working at BioWare on Baldur's Gate 1 and 2, and all of the old CRPGs that we've done the enhanced editions for. But Axis and Allies, was very much a personal passion project of his. And back when they started working on it, the team was a lot smaller. The company was a lot smaller in its state back then. So we had a team working on Neverwinter Nights Enhanced Edition, and a small team kind of started to form up with some industry veterans working on Axis and Allies. And then it's been interesting to watch because as we've hired, and the studio's grown quite a fair bit over the past, even the past year or two, watching new people come into the studio who are like, what's Axis and Allies? And they start playing the game, they just get instantly hooked.
Yeah, it's a fun game.
The amount of people that we had playing the game online here in the studio, because of its asynchronous nature, we were actually losing quite a fair bit of man hours to people playing the game inside the studio. People are just getting hooked on how easy we made it to just play the game. We didn't have to bother with the setup or anything. And, the swings that happened with the dice rolls, it was it picked up a lot, inside the studio here. It got really, really, really popular over the past, while we've been working on it. So it's been really, really interesting to watch new employees come on board, be like, what's that? Or oh, I don't like Axis and Allies. They give it a try, and then, 1 or 2 games later, they're hooked and they're playing every day now.
Was it a game that had any personal cachet with you before you came to Beamdog?
So I had played it once back in junior high, I think. One game. I don't remember too much about it. When I was doing my game design course in Vancouver, we actually had a analog board game class where we studied analog board games and analog board game design. How do you make a board game, and how do you make a board game fun? We kind of had to make a game at the end of it, like a prototype game. One of my instructors, or one of the TAs, we had a games lab course where we would go and we'd basically play existing games and study them and figure out, kind of break them down to the core pillars of design for each game. He gave us a choice for a board game to play. He wanted to do a long form board game with us as a class. So he gave us the choice between Diplomacy or Axis and Allies Global Edition. So that's the big 1944. It's kind of combined together to make the full map. The class eventually chose that option, and we played it, and we were all hooked. It took us about 2 or 3 days to play through it. We were taking pictures of the board to make sure no one was tinkering with it while we couldn't play the game. We got really, really into it. We were doing paper treaties and stuff. It was insane. But yeah, we had a lot of fun with it. So it's something that I've always I've played, and I have a passion for it. I've got a lot of friends who are really big into World War II strategy games. So I have played it with them. I had been playing it with them prior to joining Beamdog as well too. They like to get together once every 3 months and play a game of 50th Anniversary Edition.
Nice. So I'd say that leads into my next question. What version or mix of versions of the rules is Axis and Allies 1942 Online?
So it's entirely based on Axis and Allies 1942 Second Edition. So I think that came out, I want to say 2008, if I recall, maybe 2012. And it's kind of it's a vastly streamlined version of the game compared to some of the other releases. So 1942 Second Edition doesn't have research. It's got a few less territories on the map compared to some other versions of the game. It's got a higher amount of IPC that it hands out to the players, so they can buy more things and have the game progress a little bit faster. So it's a simplified, streamlined version of the game that is kind of designed to be played a little bit quicker than some of the other ones.
Mm-hmm.
So the reason that we chose to go that route was, again, for that new player, because there's a little bit less right off the get-go in terms of game design and features that we would need to accommodate for. We chose to start off with a little bit simpler of a version, and then kind of see where things go from there. So if the game is successful, we would definitely love to look at other versions of the game or adapting different rule sets or something like that. But yeah, it was we just wanted to start simple to get players hooked on Axis and Allies as a brand, essentially, and then kind of grow the community from there with new features as we go through early access and other stuff like that.
Yeah, I was looking on, I had the Axis and Allies Wikipedia entry pulled up. 2012, Axis and Allies 1942 Second Edition came out, which I have not personally played. I've played, all the Axis and Allies that I played would be prior to Second Edition. So would you say that one of the main differences is the fact that you can't research like rockets or long-range bombers or anything like that?
Yeah, for sure. Without the research, the game kind of starts off with the initial board setup, and then a lot of it is really kind of just focusing on the combats and moving things around. It's less of an idle game compared to versions of the game that have the research, I find. Especially here, like watching our players play. Players tend to be a little bit more aggressive than what I've historically seen playing the actual board games for the different versions.
Oh, really? What has been... You put it out early access. I'm assuming that you had a decent play test, with people who either had or hadn't played the game to kind of, to see how both people approached it. And I'm not asking you for numbers. I mean, if you ever want to share numbers, feel free, but I'm not trying to get into numbers. But what, like the early access interest and the amount of people playing the game, would you say that it's surprising in a good way, about what you expected? Like what has been your reaction to the early access take up?
It's been pretty positive so far, actually. So we've got quite a few people playing kind of concurrently at the same time, which is really, really good. Obviously, if you've had the chance to hop online and play, you'll notice a little bit of server strain right now. So we're working on ramping that up and solving some of those problems with the servers coming down and restarting themselves a lot. So we were definitely prepared for an uptick in traffic, but I think the speed and the amount of players we have playing at any given time right now is really, really positive.
I do want to share that I believe it's Sarah with Beamdog. She sent me a key because I had expressed interest in interviewing Beamdog about the game. So just in full disclosure, I got a Steam key from Beamdog. However, I would be having this interview anyway, so that was I appreciate it. But there's the positive notes in my voice are not because I got a Steam key. The modes I've played are the tutorial and single player. I have not played online yet. I was refamiliarizing myself with the game, by doing that, and it seems very polished. It feels like Axis and Allies.
Yeah.
Now, the people who, about the main difference, I think that longtime players who are like, I loved this game in the 80s or 90s, and now suddenly it revitalizes their interest in the game. Probably about the main difference is that, this version, you don't have the opportunity to spend IPC, which is like something production credits, industrial. Yeah, it's basically the money of the game. And you can, in the original version of the game, you could basically, quote unquote, invest IPC into the chance to research. So you were kind of gambling IPC, but trying to get better tech. But some of those techs that you could get would unbalance the game. I know a lot of people would really complain about rockets, and it was either long range bombers or heavy bombers. But having said that, if Beamdog's relationship with the Axis and Allies brand continues, did you ever see mechanics like that making their way into a version, or is it an optional rule you could turn on?
Oh yeah, for sure. We would love to continue to build Axis and Allies online. Beyond 1942, we have nothing to announce or no kind of concrete plans right now. We're really just focused on early access and getting the game to a really, really good state where we can leave early access and be kind of the full release right now. But I know the team and I both, we all have a lot of passion for the games right now. We would love to do things like research, or with Axis and Allies and Zombies, for instance. They've got the neutral zombies that kind of spawn up throughout the map and can interfere with the war between the Axis and Allies. There's a lot of really cool and interesting mechanics that can be done with that. So I think from a design perspective, it'd be really cool to try and tackle that. But right now, we're just really, really focused on getting Axis and Allies 1942 online to a really, really good spot where everyone is having a really good time, both experienced players and new players, like I was saying. But that's kind of, and that's, like I said, that's the primary focus right now.
Okay, cool. So since this is like Trent Oster's passion project, and Trent basically, is I don't know what his official title is. I don't know if it's CEO of Beamdog, but has he kind of given you, when nobody's looking, has he kind of given you that nod and that thumbs up, like, oh yeah, you hit it, baby?
Yeah, he's incredibly passionate about the project. He plays a lot. He plays almost every day. He was playing online with us here in the studio quite a fair bit with all the players here. But we actually have a group of players in the D&D Classic console port team that are definitely the best players in the studio, and he would constantly play against them, and he would constantly get crushed no matter who was playing. So even though he's an aggressive and really good player on his own, by their powers combined, he's been playing a lot of the single player against the AI. Yeah, he loves playing Germany and throwing subs absolutely everywhere on the board. So no, he's like I said, he plays the game every day. He loves it. He's really, really happy with where it's at right now, and he's extremely proud of the launch that we did yesterday.
Well, cool. So I'm going to I got to take a quick break, pause I got to do some show notes, and we got to take care of our sponsors. But when we come back from that, since you mentioned AI, I wanted to talk a little bit about that when we get back, and also the modes of playing the game. And then maybe for, because there are people out there that are like, okay, I get Axis and Allies as a World War II game, but I don't really know what it is. So maybe we can clarify that a little bit after the break. But for some quick show notes, folks, remember that if you're listening to the podcast version or the Krypton radio version of the show, the show notes for today's show will be up on the blog at shaneplays.com. That's ShanePlays.com. Last week's show is archived on the blog, and that was episode 193, and that we had DM tips and Destination Fantastic with Satine Phoenix and Stefan Picorni. Really cool show. That Destination Fantastic project they're working on was really, really, really interesting, and in some cases almost important. So I would urge you to go listen to that if you haven't already, and consider supporting that on Kickstarter. Again, the show does go out as a podcast after the radio broadcast, usually like the next Wednesday or Thursday. It goes out on the blog at shaneplays.com, iTunes, Google Play Music, Stitcher, Podbean, SoundCloud, YouTube, and more. And last but never least, Shane Plays Geek Talk is carried on Krypton Radio. Krypton Radio is sci-fi for your Wi-Fi. KryptonRadio.com. We're carried a week delayed on Saturdays and Mondays on KryptonRadio.com. So I'm going to give some love to some sponsors to help keep us on the air. And folks, remember this show. This is a radio, FM radio, talk radio show first and a podcast second. And that does have expenses that a lot of podcasts don't. So I never position it as if you don't support by Patreon that the show will go off the air, but that's not the case at all. However, it's kind of an experiment. I don't know of a lot of Geek Talk radio out there, and I'm supported by both sponsors, traditional radio sponsors, and then also the listeners via Patreon. So you can go to patreon.com/Shane Plays and support for as little as $1 an episode. But again, only if you like the idea of Geek Talk Radio and you like this radio and just want to support it. But I never want to give the impression that it's like, fess up the ducats or the show goes away, because that is not the case. I don't want to ever leave that impression. Having said that, a little adds up to a lot. And over the years, I've gotten hundreds of dollars in support from the listeners, and I do appreciate that. But let's get to our sponsors. And when we get back, we will be talking with Cody We Met, who's the producer for Axis and Allies 1942 Online for Beamdog. And we're going to talk about, the modes of play and a little bit more about what the game actually is if you're not overly familiar. When we come back on Shane Plays Geek Talk. Are you a fan of thrilling adventure, daring suspense, and just a touch of romance? Cursova has you covered. Since 2016, Cursova has been publishing the very best in contemporary fantasy and science fiction, retro pulp, and for you D&D gamers, Appendix N style fiction. Based in Little Rock, you can pick up their flagship magazine locally or at Michael Tierney's The Comic Book Store on Treasure Hill Road or Collector's Edition on JFK in North Little Rock. Swing by one of Michael's stores and pick up an issue or find them on Amazon. CIRSOVA, doesn't start with a K, it starts with a C. CIRSOVA, Cursova Magazine. Check them out today.
Comic book lovers, visit thewildstars.com today. From the mind of author and comic book industry expert Michael Tierney, it's not just a comic book, it's a comic book novel. The Wild Stars is sci-fi and so much more. Learn the explanations behind UFOs and space gods. This isn't the Twilight Zone. This is the region of the Milky Way galaxy known as the Wild Stars. We guarantee you've never read anything like it. The complete comic book novel took 20 years to tell, with one reviewer noting, the story of the Wild Stars stretches ambitiously across space and time, from small-town murders to the destruction of planets, with every event given multiple layers of meaning. If you haven't read The Wild Stars, you're missing out. Visit thewildstars.com today. Shane Plays Radio is blessed to have sponsors, and we appreciate them very much. However, did you know that you can also support the show as an individual for as little as $1 an episode? Simply go to patreon.com/ShanePlays.
All right, we're back on Shane Plays Geek Talk, a journey into the things we love. I'm your host, Shane Stacks. Thanks so much for listening. And we're talking with Cody We Met, who is a producer for Beamdog for the Axis and Allies 1942 Online game that just went into early access on Steam on July 31st at, I think the normal price is $19.99, and there's a early access discount right now of 10%. So it's possible you could jump in on that if that discount's still going when you go check it out. But go to Steam, look for Axis and Allies 1942 Online. And for those of you that don't know or just vaguely know, Axis and Allies is, especially for its time, was a very involved board game simulating parts of World War II. And it was Axis and Allies. So you had the Axis, which was Germany and Japan, and then you had the Allies, which was the Soviet Union, Great Britain, and the United States. And you could play, everybody could play up to one country, so you could, have 5 different players working in conjunction, or you could have, one person play the Axis, the other person play Allies, or whatever. Now, for a hardcore wargamer, because a lot of people don't know how deep war game simulation goes. a hardcore wargamer is going to look at this game and say, oh, that looks pretty fun. But it's not, super, super hardcore realistic simulation. And that's fair because the game was never designed to be super, 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 you have war gamers that will, there's so much math and this and that because they want everything to be simulated as deeply as possible. But for the average board game, especially when Axis and Allies first came out in the 80s, this set a new bar. This was a Milton Bradley game originally. So for Milton Bradley to publish a game like this was very cool. And since then, I believe that it's Wizards of the Coast or Hasbro has purchased Milton Bradley and Avalon Hill. And Avalon Hill is their traditional war game studio. And now I believe it's under the Avalon Hill brand, for the board game. And I saw the Avalon Hill logo on the online version that Beamdog has put out. So you have all the 5 different countries in 2 different sides. And you've got, I believe Axis and Allies 1942, Cody, that's global, right? The map is global?
Yeah. So,
okay.
You've got Pacific Theater in addition to the Atlantic Theater.
And you basically start, everything is it's like at the beginning of a movie scene where all the actors are in place and all the parts are in place, and then the director says action and you go from there. So the United States already has certain resources. Britain has certain resources, and they're placed in certain areas around the board, and then you go and try to have your side win. Now, is this the first time that you're aware of, Cody, that has there ever been an official computer version of Axis and Allies before?
There has actually. I believe there's been 2. There was one back in 1998.
Okay.
That is really, really popular among the existing Axis and Allies fan base. And I believe there was another version made by Atari in 2003. That one's an interesting one because it has kind of board game aesthetic. It kind of has 2 modes of play. It's got like this top-down board game view where you see the world map and the units, just like you do in our game or in the actual board game. But then for battles, rather than having them be kind of dice rolled, I believe, it kind of turned into a quasi real-time strategy game. So that was a really interesting one. But yeah, those are the 2 popular ones that were official kind of Axis and Allies games that were released by Hasbro and the previous license owner, Milton Bradley.
Okay, so I guess what I was my main reason for asking that question, I was trying to get down, was this the first time that AI has been developed commercially for Axis and Allies? Doesn't sound like it, no. But how difficult was the AI to put together and how hard is the AI?
So the AI was definitely a really, really interesting challenge. So the AI in the game is it's a scripted AI. So that poses some interesting ways that we have to approach it. So we can give the AI like a set strategy for turn 1 essentially. But even by the time you get to Japan or the United States, the board game, the board setup and the board layout is in such an interesting place that it really becomes hard to have that turn 1 strategy kind of be maintained. It has to kind of turn into a reactive state at the time. It also has to analyze the board game basically on its turn. It can't plan for future turns necessarily or look at the past. And it kind of takes everything in the moment. So that posed a lot of really, really interesting challenges for us to kind of develop that AI strategy and how it reads the game every time it gets to its turn. We worked really, really hard on the AI with the team that we have here. I want to call out a few of the developers that worked on it, Kevin and Ryan and Theo. They did a really, really solid job working on the AI and getting it to the state where it's at now, where it's definitely designed to be more of a learning tool for new players as you come on board, figure out how to work with the user interface and learn the game and some basic strategies with the AI before you hop online. So I definitely wanted to use it as a learning tool for those newer players. And, like when you want to play a game and you just want to like fire a couple of rounds against the AI, just be able to quickly hop on and do that as well too.
Okay. So yeah. And speaking of modes of play, you can go online and play against other players. Now I'm assuming that you can have up to 5 players or a minimum of 2 in an online game. Is that kind of how it's designed?
Yeah. So you can so the game is a 5-player game. So 2 Axis versus 3 allies. You can have any combination of human players or AI players in there. The bare minimum you have to have is 1v1. So one person plays both the Axis powers and one player plays all 3 of the ally powers. So you can kind of do that 1v1 setup. You can't do like, I want to be the Soviet Union versus Germany only. All of the other powers need to be there and they still need to take their turns and everything else. Yeah,
the entire game is based around all 5 powers being in the game. That's the game. I mean, that's the basic, setup. I saw there's the online version. There's the single player version where you can do a single player campaign. It's just you against the AI. And again, on that one, as many or as little can be the computer player. Like you could just do like, for example, Great Britain and the computer can play everything else. Or you could play, I want to be all of the allies or whatever. Then there's there's a tutorial, of course, that teaches you how to play the game. And then there's a hot seat. So for people who don't understand, what is hot seat?
So hot seat gives you a way to play locally on one computer with up to 5 friends, essentially, or up to 4 friends, I should say. So lets you play on a single monitor, laptop, whatever, with your friends. And basically you hop on to the seat, you take your turn, you hop out, someone else hops into the seat, kind of like hot potato. And it lets you basically play the game in your house or wherever you are on your computer, just like you would play the board game, but without the setup, without the mess, just really quick and easy to play.
All right. So is there a sort of a hot seat or a play by email kind of online version? Like I know it asked me for my email address so that it could email me when it's my turn. So is there, like, if you're playing an online version with other players, does everybody have to stay there until it's finished, or can they jump in and do their turn and then jump back out and then the online game keeps going, or what does that look like?
So the game is completely asynchronous, and what that basically means is you can hop online, you take your turn, and then you can either leave and go make a sandwich or go to sleep or go on vacation, whatever that activity looks like, and the game will continue. So we'll transition to the next player and wait for them to take their turn. Everything is, for the online games, is stored online in our servers, so you don't have the risk of losing your game or anything else like that. It's all saved automatically. You can even start your turn, and if something comes up where you need to put the game down, you can put it down and leave at any time. So if you hit your combat phase and you haven't wrapped up all of your combats yet, you could very easily quit the game, go do what you need to do, come back and pick up exactly where you left off. Or you can also sit there and watch the other players take their turns. So the game is completely asynchronous to allow for that kind of behavior. And that has some interesting things that affects gameplay from like during combat, for instance, where in combat, the defenders don't choose their casualties in order to keep the game going. So if the game wasn't asynchronous, we would need to send out a notification, or it would need to be live on there at any given time, where every time the player rolls their dice, the other player needs to be there to select their casualties. We've automated that process with what we call defense profiles. So there's one that's included when you download the game that's based on the IPC value of units. So it will take away the lowest value IPC units first and then kind of work its way to the more expensive ones as you progress through combat. Or you can go into the options, into the account settings, and you can customize and make up to 5 additional profiles that have whatever order you want, or any other special abilities that some units have. So, for example, if I have submarines, if there's no destroyer present on the opposing side, get the option to submerge when they're on defense or offense, and run away, basically. Become non-combatants and just leave the combat. So in your defense profile, you can enable that. So if someone tries to attack your submarine fleets with anything but destroyers, your submarine fleet can just submerge, leave the combat, and be perfectly fine for you to go pick up the next turn.
Okay. All right. So, yeah, it definitely sounds like that you could either just, plug, everybody stays online the whole time, or, if you have a friend that you want to play a game out over a month or whatever, you can go either way with it, sounds like. So, and some people, it's almost like a play by email if you wanted to do it that way. It's not play by email, but you could take it at that pace if you wanted to.
Yeah, basically. We send out notifications via email when it's your turn. So, I mean, for lack of a better term, it kind of is play by email, but without an email interface. It's definitely got a little bit flashier than email.
Okay, gotcha. For a final question, what is your favorite country or side to play?
I mean, I like playing as the Soviet Union, actually. I really like the challenge of playing the Soviet Union. My play style when I used to play like StarCraft and stuff like that was a little bit more defensive. So the idea of having a strategy that's basically lose as slowly as possible is kind of appealing to that part of me. I also really like playing Great Britain. Two fronts of combat up in the European theater and then down in India is really, really interesting. So yeah, the multiple fronts there is I find really, really challenging. And then playing as the Soviet Union is basically, I consider kind of hard mode. So
okay. I know that Axis and Allies has gone through a lot of iterations, but the earlier versions, the game usually came down to one of two things: the eventual build up by Germany and attack on the Soviet Union, or the confrontation between the Japanese and United States fleets. And depending on how those went, that usually dictated how the overall game was going to wrap up. Is that still kind of a dynamic? I mean, because that's the dynamic of the real war. Is that, or is it not quite that straightforward anymore?
That's definitely there. There's definitely like the threat of Germany pushing into Russia and taking over the Soviet Union and gaining 2 victory cities there. Japan definitely being aggressive in the Pacific. Japan's kind of interesting because they have to be aggressive against the United Kingdom kind of on land, and then also against the United States with the Navy. So Japan's got a few interesting challenges with it, and they can definitely swing the flow of combat. If Japan can push into India and take it and then start pushing into Russia, it's a matter of time until the Soviet Union kind of collapses from that because there's just too much pressure. So it's up to the Allied powers, the United States and the United Kingdom, to try and relieve that pressure on the Soviet Union as much as possible and try and find those holes in either the German or the Japanese armies so that you can kind of push through and start taking some of that vital territory and just slowing them down. That's kind of the big thing right now. If the dice rolls don't go your way, you can definitely see those kind of outcomes start to happen. But yeah, it's there's a couple of different kind of key focal points of areas of interest that can definitely swing the flow of combat in 1942 Second Edition fairly early on. It's definitely the Soviet Union and Russia, but almost more importantly is almost India, because that if the Japanese successfully take India, it's really, really hard for the Allies to take it back or to slow down both Axis powers from taking over the Soviet Union.
Huh. Okay. Well, cool. Well, so it sounds like that there's, it's not like just one focal point decides everything, which is cool. That'll make it more enjoyable for the strategist out there. So it's not just a board game masquerading as a strategy game. There's definitely some strategy there. All right. Well, Cody, that's our time. I wish we could talk longer. I wish wish I could play you a game real quick, but I know you have to get back to it. It's a very, even though you're quote unquote have released the game, there's still a lot that you're doing in your team. So, I'm looking forward to playing more Axis and Allies. What I played of it so far, the online version definitely felt a lot like playing the board game version. So, you didn't try to reinterpret it, which, I for one appreciate. So
thank you.
Yeah, all right. So, folks, it's Axis and Allies Online, or Axis and Allies 1942 Online from Beamdog. It is an online adaptation, video game adaptation that you can also play single player of Axis and Allies second edition, which came out in 2012. And it's a cool game. I'm pretty impressed that Beamdog, which is known for a different genre of game, has put this out in such a, it's like, it feels like that they already have war game experience as far as video games, playing this. So good job. And then you can get it in early access on Steam right now. I guess final question, and these are dangerous questions because, either A, you're like, I don't want to be put into that corner to answer, or B, we don't know yet. But do you have sort of any kind of real loose target date on when you think you'll come out of our early access?
Definitely when it's ready.
Yeah.
I want to make sure that we're staying in early access kind of as long as needed to make sure that the game gets into a really, really good state. We definitely have some target things that we want to have completed before we kind of consider leaving early access.
Right.
And some other things that we're working on as well, too, that I think will be really, really cool for the fans, especially as people become more and more experienced with the game. We definitely want to find ways to make their gameplay experience a little bit smoother.
Super cool. All right. And then, so as soon as you come out of early access, the next installment is Axis and Allies and Kaiju. So one of the factions will actually be Godzilla and the other one will be Rodan. I don't know. Okay, Cody, I both love and hate to do this to you, but it's time for the bad joke of the week. This is how we always close the show. So I hope that the waiver notarized paperwork arrived, so that you can't sue me for mental cruelty.
I'll pull out my dad card. I'll just put it right here on my desk.
Okay, so your what? Wait, your what card?
My dad card.
Your dad card. There you go. Yes. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. No. Then that will protect you. Okay. What do you call an empty can of Cheese Whiz?
I don't know.
Cheese Was. Yeah, that's right. That's the correct.
What do you say when someone? What do you say when someone takes your cheese?
Hey, why'd you take my cheese?
No, nacho cheese.
Okay, all right. No, the listeners. It's mental cruelty. I've only got so much insurance. So, all right. Thanks, man. I appreciate it, folks. Axis and Allies, 1942 online, early access. Go check it out. We've been talking with Cody Ouimet, who is the producer for Axis and Allies 1942 online at Beamdog. Cody, thank you so much.
Thank you very much for having me. It was a pleasure.
Yeah, continued success with the game. And folks, we will catch you next time on Shane Plays.
So game testing, also known as QA or quality assurance, is the act of playing the game as if you're the end user, and trying to make sure that there are no bugs or problems with the game that make it unenjoyable, hard to play, or just darn broken. And the great thing about being in QA is that you get exposed to all aspects of production of games. So you learn about art, you learn about code, you learn about game design, and often if you're diligent and you're good to work with and you have some amount of humility, you'll develop a rapport with the developers in the organization and get an opportunity to move up one day. So QA can be a great way to enter into the game industry. But I also know guys who have made a career out of QA. They're QA directors now, QA managers, and they're an integral part of making a successful game.
Shane Plays Radio is blessed to have sponsors, and we appreciate them very much. However, did you know that you can also support the show as an individual for as little as $1 an episode? Simply go to patreon.com/ShanePlays.